Subscribe and follow my journey for the next decade to find out. I don't think anyone's saying that being a writer is kind of something you want to do if you want a really easy, well-paying career. It's something we do because we love it and we have a lot of passion. Hi, I'm Madeline James, and today we're going to talk about self versus trad pub. I feel like one of the biggest decisions that an aspiring author has to make is whether to go traditional or self-publishing. And this is a question that I've thought about a lot. I've done a lot of research on both sides, and I've kind of switched back and forth a couple of times, but I've done a lot of research, and it was requested that I film a video kind of going through the pros and cons as I see them and kind of why I'm planning on trying to traditionally publish. I do want to say this is not a game plan on how I want to get traditionally published. I did film a video about that a couple weeks ago, and I'll link it in the cards, but this is going to be just a breakdown of pros and cons of each and how they apply to me and what I'm going with and why. A couple of important disclaimers before we get into it. First, this is a really unique and individual decision that everyone has to make, and all of the pros and cons are going to kind of weigh differently for everyone. What I might see as a pro might be a con for you, and vice versa. And just because I personally am going to go for traditional publishing, you know what I mean, that doesn't mean that anyone that's just planning on self-publishing or is self-published is anything less than that. Like, there's nothing bad about doing that. There's nothing bad about either side. It's a very personal decision, and one person can't really decide that for someone else. I also want to add that a lot of the information that I'm kind of be pulling from in this is from different articles and videos from traditionally and self-published authors. I will try and link a ton of videos down below of the big ones, but a lot of the information is also just general common knowledge about how the process works, but I'm going to link a ton of stuff down below, and if there's something super specific that I'm mentioning, I'll try to reference exactly where kind of I got that opinion or information from. So let's get started. Okay, so years ago, before I was really finishing books and getting anywhere concrete and had like a strong goal, I guess, my plan was to traditionally publish. It wasn't really something that I knew a lot about. It was just sort of like this default, like, oh yeah, I'll eventually like try and get an agent and get published and all that. And that was sort of like my default plan, I think. But then 2 years ago, I think it is now, when I started really getting into like, okay, I want to publish, I want to be writing books and moving towards a career in this, and I need to kind of get a game plan and a plan in order, and I started researching a ton of stuff into what I could do to help set myself up for all of that. I kind of transitioned to planning on self-publishing. To get into the specific pros and cons, I've left a couple of notes that I'm going to kind of reference, so if I'm looking down, I'm referencing my notes because I don't want to forget anything. But we're going to start with the pros of self-publishing. So the first one, which is a pretty big one, is that you have complete control. You get to decide what your cover looks like, when you publish, what time of year, what your title is, all of that stuff. You have complete control over all of that. Second, you have a concrete plan. You can sit there and be like, okay, well, I'm going to finish this book by this date, revise it by this date, format it by this date, do the, pre-publishing stuff this time frame, and I'll be published on this date. And you can plan everything out really far in advance, even before you've ever finished writing a book. You have control over all of that, and you know exactly where it's going to happen. And I'm the type of person who's I'm a planner. If you've watched any of my videos, you know that. I like being able to have a timeline, to know what to expect, to be able to set everything up to work together really well for something that I can look forward to and like have milestones working towards that. So that's definitely a pro that I'm a very big fan of. The next one is that you are responsible for your own success. I watched a video, I think it was by Jenna Moresi, who was talking about her own decision to self-publish. And something she said that was, when talking to a bunch of self-published authors, if they weren't successful, the reason they said they weren't successful was because they didn't do things right. They didn't know enough about stuff. Whereas when she was talking to traditionally published authors who, didn't necessarily have successful book launches, when she asked what they did wrong, the thing that was the problem was the publisher. The publisher didn't put enough money into it. They didn't pick the right this. They didn't do this, whatever. And it was completely outside of their control. And that is a serious pro. It is in your hands. You can be responsible for your own success, and however much effort and time you put into it is something that you're going to directly get back, and you have control over that. Which, again, I really like control, so that's also probably one of the biggest reasons that was pushing me towards going self-publishing. Another one is that you get more royalties, you have a higher profit potential, I guess. I think there's a lot of statistics you can look up on this. I think the average royalty once you earn out your advance for traditionally publishing is somewhere around like 7%, something like that. I think it differs between like ebooks and audiobooks and hardcover, paperback, all that, but it's a smaller percentage. Whereas when you look at self-publishing, like with Amazon, I think the number's around like 70%, perhaps even higher, depending on how you're selling it and what type of publishing route you're going with, which that's a big difference there. With self-publishing, you can also publish a lot faster. You don't have to wait to query and get an agent and get a publishing deal and, all that, which takes a really long time. And even once you have a publishing deal, it takes years to get a book published. Whereas in self-publishing, that turnaround can be really fast. Another pro is that you can write less commercial content. You can write what you want to write, and you don't have to write what will sell. You can write books that are in more niche markets that maybe the traditionally publishing industry isn't interested in, and you just have a lot of more flexibility when it comes to that. The next two are ones that are a little bit more personal to me, but a pro is that I have the ability to save and invest in being self-published. I have a really good job right now, like I make a good amount of money. I can save up and take the time it would take to be ready to self-publish, take the next few years to start setting aside money and be prepared to, pay the amount that it costs to self-publish. Like that is something that is possible for me. And then the other one is that I would get to learn and be a part of everything, which I find very interesting. I love researching things. I love learning new things, as you all probably know. So the idea of learning how to either maybe not design my own cover, but learning about, what kind of covers sell well, how to set them up well, like what goes well in my specific genre and what books I want it to look good next to and all that, and giving that information to a cover designer, like learning all that stuff, learning how to format it, getting to do all of those different parts of it is something that's very appealing to me. I find all of that very interesting, and I think it would be a lot of fun to do. And I do think that because I'm more of a research-focused person, I'm a note-taker, I'm a planner, I'm a very creative person, I think that I am capable of learning the skills that it would take to do that, and I think I could do it, at least moderately well. Another big pro is that the self-publishing industry is booming and has been growing significantly in, even just the last decade. I have a list here of just things that you can do as a self-published author, which I've done a ton of research on, so these are just pulled from my notes from when I was planning on self-publishing, but let's see, you can apply for or pay for editorial reviews, you can work with places like BookBub, NetGalley, Goodreads. There's great formatting software out there. There are a lot of cover creation tools that you can use, things like Canva. There are freelance editors and cover designers, and I think that market is growing. There are on-demand printing services that you can use, sites like ACX where you can interview and hire audiobook narrators. There are sites to get readers for ARCs, companies that will arrange book blog tours. There's just a ton of different services and professionals that are for self-published authors to use, and that makes it a lot easier to self-publish. There are just, in general, a ton of guides and a ton of information out there, and a ton of people that are willing to help self-publishing authors. And really, if you want to find information about something, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to figure out how to do it yourself. There is a ton of resources out there to help you learn. And another side note, I guess, is if you research self versus traditional publishing and which you should choose, almost every article you find will probably push you towards self-publishing. And there are a lot of reasons for that. For most people, it seems like it probably really is the best choice. There seem to be two big tools to really help you push a self-publishing career towards success, and that is rapid release and building up a backlist. Having a self-published career is something that grows over time. It'll build with book after book as you build up your backlist and you publish, preferably rapidly because it's self-publishing, and you publish and publish and publish, and eventually you'll build a following and a readership to the point that you can have a successful career in self-publishing. And then the last pro for self-publishing that I have is that you can publish every single book that you write. You can publish the first book that you write. You can publish all the books you've already written. You have that control because it's in your power to decide what you're going to publish and when. You're not going to have to shelve a ton of books. You're not going to have to set aside book after book after book as you're trying to find an agent. So the cons of self-publishing. And these really come down to what your personal goals are and what you're trying to achieve. And I think everyone has a lot of different goals and how they would measure their own success as an author. So this is definitely going to be very tailored towards what I see as cons, and they might not be cons for you. If I was going to self-publish, or if I ever decide to self-publish, my goal would be to have my books be as competitive to traditionally published books as possible. I would want to do it right. I would want to have as successful of a career as I could physically possibly have, and I would want to put whatever time and effort it would take to do that. When I was planning on self-publishing, I put together a lot of plans and timelines. I have large sections in my Google Drive just filled with research and notes and plans and timelines. And in these timelines, I had everything from developmental copy editors to audiobook narrators to trade review submissions to ARCs to just every tiny little step and thing I'd want to do, how much time it would take me to do, when I'd want to start doing it. And I had this schedule almost and this sort of projection of what a self-publishing career for me could look like and when I'd be doing what and how long things would take me. And it became very obvious very quickly that this would take a ton of time and effort. And this is not just to do all of those things, which is a full-time job by itself, but learning how to do all of those things in the first place. Because you're basically either learning to do all these things at a competitive level to industry professionals that have been doing this for years and it is their full-time job to just do that one thing, and you're trying to do that one thing and 30 other things all at the same level as 30 different industry professionals. And that's a lot of effort. And you're either having to put in that time and work, or you're going to have to pay the money to pay professionals to do it, but you're still going to have to learn enough to know which professionals to hire and what to ask for and how to guide them and all of that kind of stuff. So you're either putting a ton of time or a good bit of time and a ton of money into it, or some, degree in there, but it takes a lot. Now, we're not at the part that I was discouraged yet. There's a few more cons before we really get there, but the next con is that you have to rapid release. You have to publish quickly. From the research I've done, it seems like you have to publish at least every year in order to keep up momentum, and a lot of the self-published authors I've seen who are pretty successful, they're publishing 2 or 4 or even more books a year, which is a lot of work. And when you look at the types of books that I like to write, I'm an adult fantasy writer, those books are really long, and you have to do a ton of world building and map making and tons of things in addition to all the other stuff that you have to do to plan out a book, and it just takes a lot of time. And if I have to do all the things required to self-publish, if I have to learn all of these different skills, and I have to write a book, at least one a year, that is more than a full-time job for me. That is something that if I wanted to do it right, if I wanted to have the best chance of success, I would need to quit my job and dedicate a full-time job and probably a lot of my free time as well into doing this. And the thing is, I have 2 kids under 4. I have little kids. I don't know if you can hear them screaming downstairs right now, but they take up a lot of time, and I love them desperately, and I want to be able to spend that time with them. So I only have a few hours after they go to sleep every night, potentially, that I could do this. And I have a ton of other stuff that I need to do with my time, like, I don't know, be with my husband, read books, do literally anything else that I want to do, clean my house, do the dishes, do the laundry. So I don't have enough free time to even probably do it at a book every 2 years, a book every 3 years. Like, it would take so much time. And it would be really stressful and really draining if I'm wanting to write and I can't because I have to do all of this marketing and advertisement and things that aren't writing, and I can't do as much of the actual writing, which is what I really want to do. The other thing with that is I have a really good job and I really love my job. I am not at the point where I feel like I've done everything I can do in my job. I have a lot of growth ahead of me, a lot of really great opportunities, and I look forward to them. And I make good money. Like, I have a stable career, I make good money, I have benefits, I have a 401k, like, I'm saving for retirement, and our lifestyle, our home, daycare's really expensive, like, we need that money. I can't afford to just give up my entire paycheck and not necessarily make much money otherwise. Like, we can't do that, and I don't want to give up my job right now. There may come a time in the future where I do want to go part-time or, just be a full-time writer, but I'm not anywhere close to that right now. And then to get to the biggest con as I see it, there are no gatekeepers. I listed this in the pros too, but this is also a really, really big con for me, and the big reason is that you will never know how good your book is. You can pay editorial reviewers, you can have beta readers, you can ask people to read your book. But the thing is that they can tell you how much they like your book, but they can't tell you if your book is good enough for you to achieve the goals that you want to achieve. And that's terrifying. Like, you could be publishing books for decades and have them not be good enough, and you didn't know that they're not good enough. You didn't know what's wrong, or know that you really need to put the time and effort into learning more and not focusing on self-publishing, and you need to be focusing on becoming a better writer so that you can write books that are as good as you want them to be. And you could just never know that and go your whole writing career not knowing that you're putting out crap. And, that's probably mostly my fear talking, but that concept terrifies me. Like, hardcore terrifies me to think that I could self-publish a book, put all this time and effort and money and quit my job to do all of this stuff and be self-publishing mediocre books. Biggest con for me, and that's one of the biggest reasons why I don't want to do it. So then, just to list a few other cons that are slightly less big deals to me, but are cons I want to mention anyway, are self-publishing in general is less prestigious, but it seems like that's getting better. Some parts of the market are less accessible or completely closed off to self-published books. That is also getting better, but it's definitely still a con right now. There's less visibility. You get a lot of visibility just by default of being traditionally published. There's a lot of, book reviewers and articles and just things that are automatically watching the books that are being traditionally published, and that's not the case for self-published books. There are also some genres that are more favorable or less favorable to being self-published. So, like, if you look at the romance, the erotica market, mystery and suspense novels, those have very, very large self-publishing appeal. There's a ton of those books being sold and a ton of people that just, binge read those books. Basically, those kinds of shorter books that you would expect readers to kind of binge read and just read really quickly, those do really, really well in self-publishing. But if you're not in one of those genres, there might not be a lot of people interested in reading self-publishing books, or the industries around that, like the reviewers, bloggers, that sort of thing. They just might not be very interested in self-published books in those genres. Again, I write adult fantasy. Not really one of the best genres for self-publishing. They're really long, and you can't publish them very quickly, and you tend to see fantasy, especially gearing a lot towards more bigger names. It's a little bit less so, just, you get the idea. One of the big things that's I've seen a lot of conflicting information about this in other, pro-con videos about the earning potential between self-publishing and traditionally publishing. There's a lot of people that say that your earning potential is a lot higher self-publishing versus traditionally publishing. So I did look up some, research on this, some studies and everything, so I want to kind of go over that real quick. So let's see, average earnings in general by self and trad pub authors, and I will link all of these articles below. There's a 2013 Forbes article that says that the self-publishing median annual income is around $5,000, and 20% of self-published authors said that they made basically no income. Traditionally published authors' median income was around $5,000 to $10,000, and the median income for hybrid authors was around $15,000 to $20,000. To make over $100,000, you're looking at the top 1.8% of self-published authors, the top 8.8% of traditionally published authors, and the top 13.2% of hybrid authors. So you can kind of see from that most authors do not make a livable income. So the next article was a 2015 Guardian article, and this said that roughly half of self-published authors make less than $500 a year, and on average, self-published authors make less than $1,000 a year, which is kind of in line with what I have seen people talking about on the Twitter sphere and in other places in general in the writing community. And then there was a 2018 Authors Guild survey that had a lot of information in it, which I would definitely advise checking that one out. But some of the things that it said was that self-published authors earned 58% less than traditionally published authors. The median income of all authors, book-related, so just like book sales and stuff, was $3.3 thousand a year. For full-time traditionally published authors, so this is traditionally published authors that could go full-time, it was an average of $12.4 thousand a year. And the median income of full-time, traditionally published, all writing-related income was $20.3 thousand a year. And they definitely noted that romance and suspense self-published authors made significantly more money than almost any other self-published genre. And I think that, you know, a lot of that is due to the fact that, A, there are no gatekeepers in self-publishing. A lot of people are just publishing books and not actually putting the time and skills and effort into doing it well. Like, there's a lot of people doing self-publishing poorly, and so you can see a lot of those numbers are probably skewed, a little bit by that. And also, they don't have to write to market. So the fact that you can write things that aren't marketable, you can write what you want, you can write in niches that have less readership to them. That being a pro of self-publishing means that all of those people writing that way aren't going to have as much potential to make more money regardless, just because of those things. And also, in general, traditionally publishing weeds out a lot of the bad books. In self-publishing, you can just publish them, and they're probably not going to make a lot of money. They're probably not going to get reviewed well. So there's definitely like some skewing of that, and also if you consider the fact that like everyone that's tried to self-publish, or if you look at everyone that's tried to traditionally publish and look at that traditionally publishing income, it's probably a lot lower because very few of them actually ever get published. But in general, I think it's pretty obvious that like in general, if you self-publish, if you traditionally published, you, on average, would make a lot more money being traditionally published, which I think makes sense from everything that I've read. Like, I think that if you are willing to put the time and the effort into self-publishing, you probably have a higher probability of making more money. Like, if you're willing to put decades into it of just constant work, you're probably going to make a good salary. But I think that kind of applies across the board. If you're willing to put the time and the effort into it, that's kind of what you need to do to have a chance of making even close to like a livable wage, but odds are you probably won't. Okay, so we're going to move on to cons of traditional publishing. I'm going to do cons and then pros because it's going to kind of lead into kind of why I made the decision I made. And again, I have a list here. So first, it is really hard to get an agent or a publishing deal. I think the numbers I've kind of seen floating around a few different places are around like less than 1% of people that kind of query end up getting a publishing deal, which is very small odds, especially when you compare that to, what did I say? Let me go back. 1.8% of self-publishing authors make over $100,000. So if you were to just right now decide, oh, I'm going to try for self-publishing, there's only a 1% chance you'll make it, whereas if you go self-publishing, there's a 1.8% chance you'll make over $100,000 a year. You know, notable. Next, traditionally publishing is a huge time investment. It takes tons of time and years to get an agent and tons of time and years to get an actual publisher. And then it's a very slow process. Even after you have a publisher, it can take 2 or more years to actually have your book published. You don't have any creative or marketing control. You don't get to decide what your cover looks like. You don't get to decide any of those things. They could make you do fairly large changes to your book. You have no control over that. You get smaller royalties than self-publishing. I sort of mentioned this already, but I think it's like 7% versus like 70%. So that's a big difference. Advances are a lot lower than they used to be, and few authors even earn out their advances to earn royalties, which is something that Alexa Dunn, she has a bunch of videos on traditionally publishing and why she's doing it, and a decent bit of the prose in here kind of comes from that video, and I highly recommend it. It will definitely be linked below. But a lot of subgenres / niches aren't interested in being traditionally published. The publishers aren't interested in buying those books. So depending on what you write, you might have basically no chance at all. Let's see. You have to write to market, and you have to write more commercial books, which kind of limits your creative freedom. You have no control over where they put you in your list. They could put you at the bottom of the list. They could put you at the mid-bottom of the list. They could put very little money and marketing behind, or in addition to just kind of the basics that they do in your book, and you have no control over that. As you saw before, it's very rare that even if you get a traditionally published book deal that you will be able to make a full-time income. You have deadlines as a traditionally published author that you do not have other than self-imposed ones as a self-published author. Authors are still expected to do a bit of marketing. So I see a lot of differing things over how much you would have to put into these types of things, but based off how I would want to do it, I would be putting a lot of time and effort into marketing. So, you know, that's definitely a con, that if I'm going to put this much money into marketing my book, regardless of whether or not it's traditionally or self-published, 70 versus 7% royalties, you know? So next is you are relying on their cover designers, their editors, their formatters, etc. You have no control over who they give you, and if they have a bad product or they're not doing well, you don't have any control over that and getting a different one. Another con is that there's a lot of pressure on how well your first few books do. If you're not successful in a certain amount of time, say a few years, if you don't sell enough books as the publisher wants, they could take your book off the shelves. They could just give up on it, and, you know, they might not be as interested in buying more books from you in the future. Versus self-publishing, where it's kind of a thing that builds. You kind of just keep building up your backlist and going and going and going, and it's not something where the success of your first few books is really expected to be that high, and there's not as much pressure on them doing as well. And then another big con is that it can take a lot of books before you get to one that could get a agent or even a publishing deal. You could be writing book after book and querying and just have years and years of frustration and rejection and just that constant having to shelve projects that you've spent years of your life working on and having to just set them aside because you can't get an agent with it. And that is a really big con. I think that all kind of, I don't know, this video feels very bleak right now, but I don't think anyone's saying that being a writer is kind of something you want to do if you want a really easy, well-paying career. It's something we do because we love it and we have a lot of passion and we don't have a choice. Let's move on to the pros of traditional publishing, bring a little bit more positivity into this. So first, you get an advance. You get a good chunk, thousands of dollars of upfront money. You don't have to pay any money to be traditionally published. If you don't have money, that's fine. You don't have to pay it. Some of the stuff that you can do, like marketing and advertising and all that your publisher might want you to do, you can do that in a way where you don't have to spend money to do it. Next, you have the highest chances for prestigious things like winning awards, movie deals, best bookstore placement, inclusion in book boxes and clubs, editorial reviews, bestseller lists, media coverage, booking events, all that kind of stuff. It is more prestigious, especially if you get published by the Big Five or one of their imprints. You get to rely on industry professionals that are, people that spend their whole day, every day, for years doing this one thing. You get to rely on their skills and expertise. You've made it through a lot of gates. For the most part, you know that your book is good. This is a really big pro for me. Like, that you're good enough, There's wider distribution. There's a lot of areas in the market that are not accessible to self-publishers or are not as accessible, and I think this is getting a lot better, but there's a lot of areas with like a lot of libraries and schools and stuff like that like you can't really get into with self-publishing, and depending on your genre, those could be really important markets for you. Let's see. Once you have a deal, you could get an international deal for your book to be translated into other languages and sold in other countries, and that's basically you just get another publishing deal and more money and more royalties for not any more work. Whereas in the self-publishing route, that's not really something I've heard of literally anyone doing, and if you did do that, you'd be paying a crap ton of money, and okay, you could probably pay to have your book translated, but how are you gonna work with the industry professionals that get stuff done in a language you don't speak? Plus, you're just like, it's a ton more work, way more work probably, than doing it in the language and the potential for more money might not be as high, and yeah. There's a video by Stephen Aaron that he just posted, which I will link below, which is about international publishing, and he talks a lot about this if you are curious. And then the next one is that you are part of a team. You have a lot of other people who are invested in the success of your book, who you can ask questions, who you can talk to and get advice on, and they are personally invested in the success of you, in your book, and they want you to do well. So then another pro, once you've put the time and the years into writing books, querying, maybe writing a bunch more books, maybe querying a bunch more, and you've finally gotten an agent and eventually a publishing deal, you just get to focus on writing. Like, you don't have to do all this other stuff every time you publish a book. Like, sure, you can pick and choose the pieces that you want to do that sound fun to you. Like, maybe you'll do some blog tours, or maybe you'll do a couple events, or, you can kind of pick and choose what you want to do, what you think would be fun. But you get to spend all your time writing, which is a big deal. You can publish a book a year and still work a full-time job. Alexa Dunn does this. I think she publishes at least close to a book a year. But you can do that if you go traditionally publishing. I could definitely not do that with my genre in self-publishing. Next page. So we've gone over the pros and cons for each, and I know you already know kind of where I'm heading or what my plan is right now, but let's talk about why I'm planning to try and be traditionally published specifically. And again, this part is going to be very individualized to me and very personal, and again, I don't think most people would make the same decision I'm making, but it makes a lot of sense for me. So my first big point is I would rather have to write a dozen books and spend a decade querying and know without a doubt that my book is good, that I have the skills to have the career I want to have, that I am only putting forth the best books that I'm capable of, rather than self-publish and have the potential that I am putting out bad books, and am putting out bad books for years. There is a video by Stephen Aaron and Michelle Schuster. It was like a live talk, which I'll post below. And they talked about if they would go back and publish any of their, what would you call it, like shelved books that they wrote while trying to get traditionally published that they never ended up getting an agent with or getting a deal with, like if they would ever go back and publish them. And what they said, and I've heard this sort of sentiment shared by a bunch of other authors too, is that no, they wouldn't, because those books are nowhere as good as what they can write now, and looking back at them, it's just not up to their standards anymore. And if they were going to go back, it would mostly be to just pull some pieces out of it and completely rewrite it, but those books aren't something that they would want to publish anymore. And if you were self-publishing and we're at the point where you've written those decades worth of books and you're looking back at those books that like you would not want to publish now because they're not good enough, you would have already published them, a lot of them. And again, this is something that is probably really focused on a me thing and a my fear thing and a perfectionist thing and an anxiety thing, but it's something that's a really big deal for me and is really important for me to mention. But okay, moving on to the next one. I do believe, I feel like this is the start of a weird speech, but I do believe that if I put the time and the effort and the years into learning and growing and improving my writing craft, if I query the right way, pay attention to what's working and isn't, and am very, very intentional about iterating in a way where I am doing it better every single time, I believe that I will get to the point where I can be traditionally published. I believe that if I do all of those things and I am persistent and do it for a decade, I will eventually get an agent and I will get a publishing deal. That is something that might change over time, but right now I truly believe that. And it's something that I've sort of heard suggested by a decent number of traditionally published authors. Alexa Dunn, I think even Brandon Sanderson has implied that, I don't know. Then the next reason is that the concept of having to find and vet and direct my own, I guess, professionals like editors and formatters and cover designers and all that, which I would go that route. I wouldn't try to design my own book covers because I'm not a cover designer. And that is really overwhelming for me, like the concept, especially with editors, that you have to pick someone off of maybe just like an editing sample, which starting with a developmental editor, which I think is, the most important part, the great first step. How are you going to really do a proper sample and learn that they're the right person for your project for a developmental edit? Like, and they're thousands of dollars. Like, I've priced it out, the editors that I kind of was looking into that I liked for developmental editing. For a book my size, you are looking at thousands of dollars. It is ridiculously expensive, and that's not even getting into things like copy and line editing and proofreading and all of that stuff. And like, that is just, it's terrifying to me. When I was doing my research and to like sort of planning on going self-publishing, that is kind of the big thing that I kept stopping at and being like, oh, I don't want to do this. I don't like this. I did not want to make that kind of a decision and be wrong. The next reason I have is I don't mind writing to market. I don't mind my book being changed to fit more to market. My thought process on it is I want to do what will have the most commercial success for my book, because I want to be a big author, I want to be a bestseller one day, and I want to write books that are going to sell. I want a lot of people to read my books. I want to get to share my stories with a ton of people and get to talk about them with a ton of people and know that the things I've written and the messages that I've put into my books are touching a lot of people. That is the biggest deal for me. And do I really care if, Mary Beth has to be renamed to Nadia or something like that? Like, I don't care. Like, I mean, I care, but I would rather go with what the publisher suggests, what they believe with their expertise, which is significantly better than any decision I could make, is the right choice to have my book be as successful as it can be. I'm not that upset if I have to change plot lines or remove a subplot or change something or delete a character. Like, I am not that attached to any little thing. My books, I mean, they live in my soul and play out in my dreams, and they mean a lot to me, and I deeply, deeply care and am invested in my stories, but I am not so invested that I'm not willing to change them in order to make them better. So the idea of having a professional or professionals advise me on what to change and tell me what to change to make me have a better chance of success, I find that a very big pro. And I am very willing to do that, and I don't really want to write books that are not marketable, if that makes sense. Like, I don't want to write YA sci-fi. I don't want to write a bunch of cross-genre books that have no market for them. enjoy reading books that are more popular. I am interested in the more marketable genres and marketable themes and tropes. Like, that's the kind of stuff that I would be writing anyway. So it's not really like, I don't mind writing to market. I am fine with that. It's not a con for me. So then next, in regards to career trajectory, I love my day job. I've mentioned this already. I love it. I want to grow a lot more in it. I want to spend more time doing it, and I like the money. I like having a stable income and knowing how much I'm going to make, being able to pay for things for my kids and, you know, live the life that my husband and I have right now. Like, I like being able to do all of those things, and I like the idea of being able to work up until the point that I am done with my day job. You know, like the point where I feel like I've accomplished what I want to accomplish in it, and I'm happy to change to being part-time or potentially leaving my career entirely and just writing full-time. I like the idea of being able to wait until that point, because maybe I won't ever get there. Maybe I won't ever be successful enough to make enough money to do that. Maybe after a decade of writing books, I don't want to be writing full-time. Maybe I'm not happy with the amount of success that I'm having, and it's not really something I want to spend literally all of my time doing. And if I quit my job for a decade, I'm not going to be able to go back to it. So I much prefer that trajectory than having to quit my job in order to even just really start, you know, working towards a career being self-published. There's a lot of other little reasons that I've sort of sprinkled throughout this, but in general, traditionally publishing just really, really is the right choice for me. And who knows if I'll ever be traditionally published, who knows if I'll ever be good enough. But that's my goal. And in the future, this could change. I mean, you know, there's a lot of things that are rapidly changing that could change over time. I mean, the self-publishing landscape continues to improve. It might be in a place in 5 years where it's a lot easier, it's a lot less time consuming. There could be companies that you can just pay to manage literally everything else for you, and even though you're paying for it, you still have all these industry professionals that can do a really good job to just trust. Maybe I'll be able to afford my day job in 5 years when my kids are in school and I've had more time to save up money, and it won't be as big of a deal. Maybe I'll be ready to quit my job. Maybe I will have grown enough in 5 years and written enough books and gotten to the point where I'm like, I am good enough. I can write books that are at the quality level that they can compare to traditionally published books. I'm just, you know, not getting lucky enough to get an agent right now, and I'm confident enough to try self-publishing. I have no idea what'll happen, what'll change over the years. Subscribe and follow my journey for the next decade to find out. So even though I plan on traditionally publishing, I do still follow a lot of self-publishing channels because I think it's interesting and I think it's good information to know. So I wanted to kind of go over some of my favorite channels of self-published authors that kind of have a lot of good educational content and that I recommend, and then a bunch of channels of traditionally published authors that I really like, and I will list them below. But the list is, for self-published author channels, The Courtney Project. I love her channel so much. She does this book series where she like redesigns and like critiques book covers for self-published authors. That's just amazing. Heart Breathings. If you don't know about Heart Breathings, I don't know where you've been. She's amazing. Author Sarah Sutton. She writes YA romance, and I just really like her channel. It's a lot more like day in the lifey. And then Abby Emmons. She does a lot of general writing advice and stuff, but she has a lot of really cool videos. Like, I think she even recorded her own audiobook. Good videos. And then traditionally published channels, I really like Alexa Dunn's channel. She just talks, she seems the most knowledgeable and shares the most about how the traditional publishing industry works. Like, it's sort of like having an inside look, and her videos are, like, everyone is just so good. Highly, highly recommend. Brandon Sanderson, he doesn't talk as much about being traditionally published or how to get traditionally published, but there's a lot of information in there that's still really useful, and it's kind of cool to just kind of hear his process. He does like weekly update videos on everything that's happening, and it's very interesting. Lizelle Sambury, I absolutely love her channel. She sort of shares more of like a day in the life kind of thing of just what the life of a traditionally published author is like, and I really like that. She does do a lot of videos kind of breaking into like writing advice and other stuff about like her journey being traditionally published and all that stuff, which is, I'm not mentioning anything that I don't highly recommend. And then Stephen Aaron, I really like his videos. I've kind of more recently found his channel, but he does a lot of really interesting content too. He wrote a ton of books before he got his agent. And then Lindsay Puckett, I love her. She's incredibly inspiring, and she's shared a lot of her journey because she started her channel, I believe, before she got her agent, while she was querying, or even before then. So you can kind of follow and watch all these videos, which I have definitely binge watched, to kind of see what the whole process was like for her. And she's a very happy person. You can't watch one of her videos and not be just like grinning, because her joy and glee is just like contagious. And then Michelle Schusterman, I love her videos too. She's very like, she's a little bit more like established into her career. She's been, you know, traditionally published a bit longer than some of the other authors that I've mentioned, but she also does things like ghostwriting and a lot of videos about that kind of stuff, and it's very interesting, and I agree with her perspectives on most things. I mean, I guess with a lot of these writers I do, but yeah, so those are some of the channels that I really recommend if you want to kind of learn more about this kind of stuff. And again, I am not published, so if you're trying to make this decision, I highly recommend you hear from people that are traditionally published and are self-published about their experiences and what, you know, they see as the pros and the cons as they've lived them. But I kind of just wanted to go over this video because it was requested, and I don't know, it's a very interesting topic to me, and a weird thing because it's so individualized and it really is different for everyone. And I'm very, very curious to see what the self-publishing industry is like in a few years, or even in a decade. Like, I definitely think it's moving in that direction where that's going to become a bigger and bigger thing that's more prestigious, and, you know, I don't know, it's going to be very, very interesting. But that's, I think, all I really wanted to talk about. If you have any questions or any pros or cons, or if you want to just chat about it in the comments below, I would be very interested in doing that. Like and subscribe if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.